Can you see my screen, Tabitha?
Yes.
Okay, and it's the full screen video
Yes. Yep.
or the full screen,
The full
presentation.
presentation. Yep.
Okay, great. Good. Have you let people in? I cannot.
Yes. Hello. People are here. Hello, everyone.
Excellent. Excellent. So I am not, welcome everyone. We're have a few little technology glitches or little Zoom things that I'm still getting familiar with, but we are gonna dive in. So if you have any we're gonna you just so glad that you're here and here to learn about interviewing. So this is the interviewing skills workshop that we've put together for you. A few housekeeping notes before we jump in. So everybody is in privacy mode, as it turns out, even me. So my camera is off, which I think will help with watching the full screen. But I'm sorry, I'm not sharing my smiling face at you, so you could see how excited I am about interviewing. Um, Hopefully my dog Dexter won't be barking, but it might happen because we do have some construction folks in the area. Also, I really love questions, so feel free to put anything at any time into the chat, and that because we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So this is me, what I look like, and kind of a couple of years ago. And I have been involved with around 1,500 different recruiting engagements. And so I could talk for hours about interviewing, but I pared it down to kind of my highlights for this presentation today. And so what we're going to be focusing on is a little bit of an overview of recruiting in general, just to kind of frame how the interview piece fits into that. I'm going to talk a bit about selection criteria, which I think is super important. Then talk about the wide variety of different formats and media types that interviews can happen in. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about one of the most important elements of an interview, which is questions, and a few logistical and strategic areas to think about during and after the interview. And then leaving some time for questions, because to put this together, it is a little bit higher level. And if you are working on a specific job posting opportunity right now, I'm happy to be very specific about your questions. So feel free to be as specific as you want when we get to the questions. All right, so with that, I'm going to move into our first section, which is around what a typical recruiting process looks like. And when we do searches, and again, we do a lot of recruiting, I focus on a search process that takes about 2 months beginning to end. So if I'm looking to fill a position, if everything's coming along and we don't have major holidays or potential Super Bowl football runs, I'm targeting about 60 days or 2 months. At the beginning of the process, I really focus on planning. What is that job description? If you don't have a job description, now is the time to update it. What are those key skills, experiences, credentials, education, behaviors, communication skills, leadership, etc., that are really key for success, and making sure that you know exactly what you are aiming for. You have a very clear target. And then there's the sourcing strategy. This is when you post the job, put it through your social media channels, spread the word through employee referral networks, get as many candidates as you can. Then you start assessing them. And the processes that I suggest are kind of multifaceted. So, the first step is to review the resume. You might do some personality tests or predictive index to get a sense for motivations. Then you might start actually interacting with these potential new team members. There would be maybe a screening interview that you do, maybe a video interview. Then there might be an on-site interview when you're ready to take it to that next level with the candidates. There also could be skills tests or technical interviews if you're hiring somebody that might be a software developer, for instance. You're also going to want to, do some your due diligence on the candidates through a reference check or background check. And then once you find that person, you are going to woo them. You're going to try to recruit them and win them over. So at a high level, this is the recruiting process. And as you can see, there's a few times where that word interview is popping up. So about interviews, there are so many different formats around what an interview can look like. It can be, what you might typically think of it of a one-on-one meeting. Sometimes it's an interview panel, especially for more senior level positions where you might have 3, 4, 5, 6 people. I know when we do city manager searches, there could be 11 people on a panel interviewing one person. And then you might have multiple panels. Sometimes it's a casual lunch meeting or coffee chat. Sometimes you might have people doing a presentation, kind of, and again, more at that senior level, or you might have an informal portion of it. Last night we were working on with a community, and we did a community reception where the candidates were there, members of the public could mingle. I have another client that's working on an upcoming kind of chief operating officer search, and there will be a reception for that person as well. What's nice about these different interview formats is that you will learn different things about people in these different settings. At a lunch meeting, it can be very clear if somebody's rude to the wait staff, that's telling. Or, they just, or they're really funny and engaging even when something awkward happens there. So that's good. Presentation style can be and communication style really come out in a presentation. So oftentimes, as they say, you want to hire slowly and fire quickly. And that's where using different formats for interviews during the process gives you slightly different pictures of that. At the beginning, we had a slide around of a puzzle and all these different puzzle pieces coming together. And that's really what you're trying to do throughout the process is using those different puzzle pieces to figure out who is this person? What is the true picture of the person that we are trying to assess for our organization? Are they going to be a good fit? And each of these different elements that I mentioned is a piece of it. And every time you have an interaction, it's another piece. And so utilizing the interviews and all these different aspects of it can be very, very handy. In addition to the different types of formats, there's also different types of media that you can use, especially, thanks to Zoom, like we're here today. So, traditionally, like a screening interview might be done on the phone. You call someone, you ask them a few clarifying questions, or maybe you have a more detailed conversation. Now there's, texting is even, you might text somebody to get some information from them. Virtual interviews are very popular. There's, especially with COVID, that's how everybody was doing everything. So you can do kind of recorded video virtual interviews that you share with other people on the team. There are virtual interview platforms out there. But it's, but you could also have a panel interview, one-on-one, technical, all the different types of interview formats can also mesh with these different types of media. And then, of course, there's in person, and many people swear by an in-person meeting, but usually they will do something ahead of time to screen people out because bringing somebody on site, especially if you've got multiple interviews and travel expenses, it's a pretty big commitment. So oftentimes you'll do something else first before really making that commitment of time and resources on your side and the candidate's side. All right, next up is around kind of that timeline and cadence that I wanted to mention. So, when you are and so this is going to be kind of a lot of information that I'm going to try to distill down into some of the different factors. So, one consideration is how you are sourcing the candidates. So, kind of there's two main ways. Either you leave the position open and you're kind of as candidates come in, you interview them, you leave the posting up, and you're kind of doing on a rolling basis. Or you might have a specific deadline. Maybe you leave the posting up for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then you review the candidates and decide who to bring in. And then you might have one interview day and you're doing everything in more of a batch process. So depending on, again, that sourcing strategy that you have also has an impact on your interview plan. So the typical structure, so then I just wanted to kind of share a few typical structures. For instance, if you have a junior, like entry level, or I would say entry level, individual contributor level position, and it's really hard to fill, like think software developers or skilled trades workers or accountants or two of my children are preschool teachers and they're like in super high demand. So in that case, you are going to want to minimize the hoops that people have to jump through. You might even text them right away just to clarify a few things like, yeah, do you have a pulse? Yep. Okay, great. We're going to keep moving on. And you're going to very quickly move to, some type of interview, maybe a, video interview, or phone, Zoom interview or a phone interview. And then very quickly, you're going to want to bring them on, because if you stretch that hiring process out too much, then, you might risk losing them to somebody else. So you want to move quickly. Again, you want to be really thorough, but you want to move quickly. On the other hand, if you have a senior role that you're recruiting for, manager, director, vice president, somebody that can have a very big impact on the organization, a bigger impact, you're going to want to really take your time. And then this is where, you'll still do the phone screen to check a few criteria. Maybe you'll have a Zoom panel interview with multiple people. And then you might have a full on-site day with tours and different lunches with different staff groups and breakfast, so that you can see people, those candidates, in a lot of different light. You might also, again, have them do a presentation and be prepared to talk about an issue that's addressing the company. And then again, you might have a reception, like I mentioned earlier, where you can see someone in, potentially socially awkward situation. How do they handle things? And you can get that holistic picture and get as many data points, as many puzzle pieces as you can to figure out how they might fit into your company. All right. Any questions so far more about logistical items that you might have? I'm throwing a lot of information at you. Okay, definitely. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat or Q&A, and Tabitha, definitely let me know if I'm missing anything.
I will for sure.
Awesome. All right. So moving on to selection criteria. So as I mentioned, that planning piece is so important. And this is what I do. This is kind of my go-to. I create a selection criteria matrix or a talent rubric or some fancy name that kind of describes what I'm looking for. So I have the list of criteria, those key must-haves, those key like kind of evaluation areas. And then I have a list for must-haves. Okay, this is the bare minimum of somebody that's going to be successful. And then I also have things that are that nice to have or ideal. So I know, if somebody shows up that has extra bells and whistles or special things, like, whoa, okay, this is somebody I'm going to move to the top of the list. And this makes it easy for me to quickly screen or have other people on the team screen, because we're all on the same page. And if you are hiring somebody where there are multiple people involved in the decision-making process, you really want to make sure everybody's aligned on these different areas, so you don't waste your time when you're going through the interview process and the rest of the recruiting process. And then I have a little, some comments about how I'm going to assess them as well. And, an interview often comes into play. Once I had and again, this criteria list is really, really important, because then it helps when it comes to putting together the questions. And these questions are, again, there's millions of interview questions, and there are different types of questions. So I, put a few of them down here. So there's open-ended questions, which, give you a really good sense of for a lot of information, as well as communication skills. And a typical one might be, tell me about yourself, for instance. And then you have behavioral questions. So these are questions that try to get at how people have behaved in the past, with the backed up psychology that how we are going to act in the future or how we've acted in the past is a great predictor of how we are going to act in the future. Like for me, I am always 5 minutes late. That's not going to change in the future, right? So, asking for questions where you understand the situation, their action, and the result can be very helpful to understand again how do people typically behave in in a specific situation that's of interest to you. Then there's the situational interview where and this would be very job specific where you would want to get to know a little bit more about their thought process and judgment and how they would apply their past experiences to a situation that they might come into. So then, maybe you're talking with somebody that's never been a customer service rep, so they wouldn't have maybe some past experience and behaviors in that area, but you would, ask them, kind of forward looking, how would you deal with a difficult customer? How would you deal with, fill in the blank type of situation that you are facing? Or right now, our organization is facing a cash shortfall. How would you help address this? So those situational questions can be very helpful. Again, as you think about what are the situations that this employee would likely face in your organization and weaving those into those interview questions. Next is kind of clarifying questions. And again, these are not in any particular order, and these questions can come into play into any different format of interview or type of interview. So clarifying is just, okay, we need, are you able to travel? Do you speak French? What are those, key, do you have your CPA certificate? What are, kind of easy yes, no questions around qualifications, skills, and abilities. So this can be very helpful if you're, again, just trying to clarify something on the resume or clarify someone's ability or interest in doing something in that job. Then there's technical questions where, there are kind of standard operating procedures or languages or processes that you need to understand if they are familiar with those as kind of a test of their abilities or capabilities. And so, developing a question around that would be, very job specific. Then there's also questions that involve some kind of homework. And again, this is usually later in the process when you're down to just a few finalists. And these can pinpoint strategic thinking, decision making, ability to do research, understand the directions and organization. So kind of, higher level skills. And this might be, what would be your 90-day plan? Or how, here's a particular situation, how would you address it? So this can be very helpful as well in getting to know someone's thought process and prior experiences and how they would apply that knowledge. Here is a list of common questions as well. And everybody here is going to be getting a white paper with lots of information as well. But here are, some typical questions that can apply to a variety of different positions. Why are you interested in the position? This is my favorite question to ask. And I usually do it on the initial written survey when we are recruiting, but it's also a great question to reiterate in an interview. Why are you interested in this position? And then why do you feel like you'd be a good fit for the role? Or what skills do you have that would transfer well into this role? If I get the answers to those two questions, that's really what most of my focus is on. But then also, another good one is around job duties. So if they are coming from one position into your position, getting a sense of how similar the positions were will help you understand how, the level of transferable skills and capabilities that they would have developed in that prior role. What are you most proud of in your most recent position? This can get at motivations, areas of expertise, areas of interest that can help kind of confirm that they might be a good fit or might point out areas of interest where they might be really passionate about something, but it's not a main focus of this position, in which case you might want to probe that a little bit further. What did you find most frustrating about your last position? This is a good question because you get to, sometimes people aren't quite expecting it, and it can be very telling about what was frustrating. And if that situation continues, is similar to the work environment or situation at your company, then it's great to, get to have that honest, authentic dialogue about it. How would your coworkers describe your performance? This is another one where, usually a potential employee isn't going to say, well, they would say I never work hard or that I'm always late and that I'm lazy. I mean, they're not going to say anything like that. But what they do say is telling, as well as helps you understand what they're not saying. How would your strengths apply to this role? That gives you good insight into their self-awareness and how they view the fit into the role. Describe a work challenge that you overcame. That can provide some good insight into technical or work-specific skills, as well as personality in terms of, persistence and determination. Describe the steps that you would take to do XYZ. Again, that's more on the technical side where you might be looking for some, industry norms to come out there and best practices. How do you deal with criticism? If you're a company that really values, for instance, growth and a growth mindset and feedback and is honest and direct, you would want somebody that feels comfortable with that. And this might be a good question to get at it. How do you prioritize your work day? This gets at, kind of organization skills, especially in a fast-paced work environment where there might be a lot of ambiguity or things change every day. This question might be really important to include. All right. So once you get your interview questions nailed down, then you're going to want to put together a nice interview outline. A typical, 45, 50-minute interview would include an introduction. So if you have a panel, you want to make sure everybody's introduced. It's a great way to put people at ease. Then you would probably have somebody go into the questions. Usually might just have one person ask questions, although sometimes you've got multiple panelists and they'll take turns. Each open-ended question, can take 2 to 4 minutes to answer based on the who's asking the question. So thus, preparing 10 to 15 questions for a 45-minute interview and then prioritizing them, could work out well. Some people can take, 10 minutes to answer a question, other people 30 seconds. You really don't know. So having lots of interview questions prepared just in case is helpful. Then you want the interview to ask questions as well. Interviewing is a two-way street, so this way it kind of works well for you to be able to get a sense of what's on their minds, where are their priorities, and that can be extremely, telling and can either confirm if you think this person's going to be a good fit or raise some questions. And then it's always good to discuss next steps to say, we'll be making, we have more interviews over the next couple of weeks, but we'll plan on getting back to you by, the end of February at the latest, or whenever, that date is. But it's always good to kind of wrap it up with the next steps. So, because the candidates are always wondering what that might be, and it's good again to make it as positive as an experience as possible, even during this really stressful time for everybody that's going through this process. So a few other things before the interview, make sure you provide the candidate with really detailed information about the location, format of the interview, who they'll be interviewing with, logistics, parking information, like adding an appointment notice to their calendar could be helpful. And then preparing evaluation sheets. So especially if you are interviewing multiple people or multiple people are doing the interview, it's good to have standard evaluation sheets around usually those selection criteria. Does this person meet, exceed, not meet that criteria element? Do you recommend hiring? Yes, no. And then gathering, so that everybody again has it so they can make notes. During the interview, you can make the most of your time. It'll go by very quickly, 45, 50 minutes can fly by. And so you really want to focus on, putting the candidate at ease and, making sure that you're getting the information you want. Some people are very vague in their answers. And it's like, wait, what? Okay, did you answer the question? I might need to redirect them. Or following up, or sometimes they say something that's very interesting that you want to build upon. So, be comfortable making some of those kind of pivots during the interview process as needed. You also want to really pay attention to assessing the candidate. Again, that's the purpose of the interview. And, be very cognizant if the answers are vague, or if they provide a lot of details. Because vague answers, might indicate that they never really did this. Don't have the experience, and it might be, there might be a steeper learning curve. Or they're just kind of making stuff up, where if there's lots of very specific details, then sometimes it increases the comfort level about their specific roles and responsibilities. Obviously, you're going to be paying attention to their personality. Are they friendly? Are they enthusiastic about the opportunity? What's their energy level like? Individual versus team accomplishments. Sometimes people always said, well, I was on a team and this is what we did. But feel free to redirect and say, so what specifically did you do? And then making sure that candidate can be very clear about their specific role. It's always great to take good notes, because, you might be interviewing multiple people and you want to be able to recall those specific areas of concern or areas of strength that you saw. And again, as I mentioned at the end, you want to kind of discuss the next steps and timing so that the candidates can plan accordingly. It's just very respectful of their time. During the interview, though, you want to be careful a little bit about interview bias. And we all have biases. That's just part of who we are. And it's good to be intentional about acknowledging some of them. So one is stereotypes. So if if like, people, you are gonna make snap judgments. So, if they see me as a woman, they might assume that I can't, pick up 50 pounds and do a construction job. Um, or they might, so be very just aware of those different, stereotypes that people might have. And, because everybody has them, everybody has those biases, but really be thoughtful of them, and don't, if you feel like you are thinking of putting someone in a category or a box because of it, fight it and be just open-minded, and understand that, stereotypes um, are a type of bias that you don't want to let distract you during the interview process. The next one is around a halo and horn effect. So oftentimes, if somebody says something, good right off the bat, then you think, wow, I really like this person, and everything else they do is kind of, add to that pleasant image that you have of someone. On the other side, if someone like they were late to the interview, or you didn't like, something about their dress or mannerisms, then you're going to let yourself be kind of focus on those negative aspects. And so that's where, try not to do a snap judgment. Try to not have an immediate first impression. Obviously you do, but try to be open-minded, and don't immediately think of someone in a positive or negative light. Be as neutral as you can, so that you're making a good decision and judgment. Another area to keep in mind is similarity. So lots of studies have shown that, we're most comfortable with people that might have a similar background than we do, or a similar education level, or came from a similar part of the country. And so, don't, keep that in mind, that, just because someone has a similar background than you do not weigh that more than those items on that criteria list. I mean, that's what you should really be focusing and evaluating. But again, these things creep in, it's unconscious, and just trying to acknowledge them, it will, is very helpful. The other is confirmation bias. And this is kind of similar to halo and horns, where once you kind of decide you really like someone, you might be, or like, oh, I love this person. I've heard such great things about them. And then everything in your interview, it's like, oh, great. Yep. All these, I'm going to ask all the questions or look for things that confirm my initial feeling as opposed to trying to challenge your initial assessment. Beauty. Apparently, looks do count in terms of first opinions. So, but don't let that shape you. Understand that, if somebody is, particularly good looking, don't let that be a way to not be diligent while looking at all the key criteria. And conformity. So sometimes people are like, oh, well, our organization is full of a lot of extroverts and this person's an introvert. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't think they're going to fit in. So, we should hire an extrovert instead. Again, that's an area where you want to be intentional and aware when you start thinking things like that and, try to put those biases aside. All right, after the interview. So definitely fill out your evaluation sheet. If you have other people, have them fill out the evaluation sheet. I'm a very big proponent of having panel interviewers fill out the um, forms by themselves anonymously, gather them before you enter into deliberations. Even if you're going to be doing it that day, get all the feedback so that people are not biased by everybody else's, views, because that can come into play where the first person that says something, everybody else will keep that in mind and maybe shape their feedback based on, well, if the boss said this, well, I don't want to say anything differently. It's like, no, you want everybody to think freely and contribute equally. And then, definitely move forward, determine next steps. What are you going to do? Are you going to move forward with the candidate? Are you going to do more interviews or start from scratch? Again, the axiom, hire slowly, fire quickly, is so important when it comes to recruiting. So a few other frequently asked questions. How about inappropriate and illegal questions? Yes, this is a key thing and issue. So anything that is related to a protected class is an area where you are going to want to be extra careful about the question. So, and this is where people don't are sensitive a little bit, but they can still get into hot water a little bit. So for instance, if you have shift work on Saturdays or Sundays, you don't want to ask, well, do you go to church on Sunday? You would rather say, what you want to keep it business focused. So, our work hours are 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Is that going to cause, are you able to do that? So keeping it job related is so important. And there's sheets and in our follow-up we have additional information kind of around the questions that you don't want to ask, but I think just keep it job related. And this is where I will generally scratch out questions like, hey, what do you like to do for fun, or what are your guiding principles, and things like that, where it's just like, this could introduce information like, oh, well, I'm involved with a pregnancy group. Oh, okay. I'm like, okay, uh-oh, now I know information about that I don't want to do. Or my husband and I like to cook. I mean, again, I just feel like, yes, it's nice to get to know people, but in a job interview situation, you want to keep it business focused. Because the last thing you want to do is get some information that is related to a protected class into the conversation. And then if you don't hire that person, then there could be an allegation of bias. So just trying to avoid this area is important, at least not to ask a question. If somebody volunteers the information, um, in, despite your best intentions, that's one thing, but trying to avoid it is something that I highly recommend. Another question that sometimes comes up around interviews is like, what about trick questions? And I literally was in a conversation one time where they were like, well, and this person, an elected official, was about, well, how would you design a baseball cap? And I was like, what? What in the world? And I still to this day do not know what they were trying to get at, other than maybe how to, handle, kind of an on the fly question about and keeping your poise. But it just, I feel like the goal is to authentically get to know people. And so having them feel comfortable, asking them work-related questions is key. And asking trick questions can maybe give you a sense of how they handle things under stress or poise, but I don't think that that's what you want to be focusing on during the interview. Otherwise, you just want to be, you're going to focus on that criteria list or talent rubric. All right, with that, I'd love to answer any specific questions from the group. I know a lot of these things might be more on the high level, and this is where you have the opportunity to ask me anything about any of your upcoming searches or things that you've always wanted to know about interviewing, but were afraid to ask.
I don't see any from the group yet, but I actually have one.
Oh, good.
Um,
All right.
and I'm just wondering, what would you say are the best ways to evaluate if a candidate is a good culture fit for your organization?
Oh, great question. So I like to define those culture aspects during that selection criteria process. So when I'm putting together my criteria list, um, those things might be like team player, or we are very focused on innovation, or our culture is very focused on teamwork or customer service, or we're very supportive of each other, or it's a very competitive culture, and people are very direct with each other, and you need to kind of have a tough skin. And so being really understanding what is your culture, what are your values, and then going into creating questions around that. So if you're looking for a team player, if being a team player is part of your culture, then creating a criteria question around teamwork, and they must put the team above self-interests. Ideal, like, demonstrated expertise working on cross-functional teams, for instance. And then you would develop an interview question around teamwork. Um, and some questions that get at culture or work environment might be like, what's your ideal work environment? And then they might volunteer, oh, well, I love it when it's a team orientation. And you're like, ding, 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 bingo. This person, mentioned that they like teamwork out of the blue in terms of their ideal work environment. That's telling. So having, some other questions in there, or, what does teamwork mean to you? Or provide an example where you are on a team and there was conflict. How was it handled within the team? Or, how important do you feel teamwork is to the success of an organization? You can create so many different interview questions based on your selection criteria. So I'm again, a big fan of going back to this area so that you can get quite authentic information from people about the culture, about their technical skills, about their experiences, anything, you name it. Great question. Thank you, Tabitha.
Of course. And I haven't seen any others come through, but please feel free to add them if you think of any.
Yep. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, feel free to call or email us if you do. We're happy to answer them. Otherwise, I guess we, wish you go Lions and have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.